This morning, inflation rates.
So as we all should know, the world is facing an inflation crisis which is affecting every country, even the most powerful economies such as that of China and the US. And while there are many possible explanations for why this is happening, this crisis is not due to policy failures of the government or bad political choices, but rather a structural problem that lies at the very foundation of the monetary system, and one that cannot be fixed without the total restructuring of our socioeconomic paradigm. Humanity has been facing a systemic crisis for quite some time now, and no matter how much money we print out and throw at the problem, it's not going to do a damn thing. A very smart person once said, "We cannot fix the problems we have by using the same mentality that created them." And as I've stated in previous videos and will continue to reiterate, capitalism is an old, outdated system that is simply incompatible with life in the 21st century. We are trying to fit a square peg into a hole, and money and markets don't fit into the equation when we factor in our present-day understandings about life and the universe. We need a new economic system that is up to date with our scientific capabilities and one that does not use money. And as I will demonstrate in this video, money is a terrible mechanism of social control that is ultimately unsustainable. So let's begin. Now, inflation is generally described as an increase in prices of goods and services and a decrease in the purchasing power of a currency, which obviously reduces people's affordability of basic needs. One side of this issue is that our global economy cannot supply things at the same level that we are used to. Our particular way of life, the one sustained by artificially cheap materials and thoughtless, mindless consumption, is coming to an end. We simply cannot continue to abuse the ecosystems of the planet, waste resources, and destabilize our climate and expect things to remain normal. For example, when it comes to coffee, fields have been hit with a higher frequency of frost and drought, causing an almost doubling of bean prices in just a few months. And there are so many other environmental issues on the horizon that are sure to make production and distribution of goods much more difficult as time moves forward. What needs to happen is that we have to change the way we operate as a global economy and society. The infinite growth, consumption-driven, throwaway lifestyle promoted by our economic model cannot be respected. What is needed is a design revolution to come up with more efficient and sustainable methods of economic management. Science and technology can allow us to arrive at better decisions, to produce long-lasting goods at a fraction of the energy and resource costs while maintaining balance with our planetary habitat. Isn't it funny how capitalism recognizes scarcity and tells people that you have to work to pay for resources, while on the other hand, it promotes infinite consumption? So let me get this straight. We live on a planet with finite resources, yet our economy encourages an ever faster rate of using those things up. What a brilliant idea, and a mind-numbing paradox at that. Another reason why things have become more expensive is actually quite simple. The concentration of the American as well as the global economy in the hands of a few corporate giants who have the power to raise prices as they choose. These mega companies complain that there are supply bottlenecks and that due to COVID, it's hard to produce and distribute goods and services, and that is why things are more expensive. But if that's the case, how come corporations are making record profits? The evidence is clear that without a doubt, 2021 was a great year for big business. They are raising prices even as they bring in more profits than ever before. Why? Well, this is yet another structural problem with our economy. It favors moneyed interests. Multinational corporations have so much power that they can raise prices with complete impunity.
I'm in a supermarket. Looks like lots of choice, doesn't it? But let's take a closer look. The four largest food companies control 82% of beef packing, 85% of soybean processing, 63% of pork packing, and 53% of chicken processing. All these products and brands from just 10 huge corporations. Look at all these brands of toothpaste. 70% of toothpaste sales go to just 2 companies. Lots of sunglasses. Actually, one company, Luxottica. They also own nearly all the eyeglass retail outlets. What brand of cat food shall I buy? There are basically just two companies. The problem with all this consolidation into a handful of giant firms is they don't have to compete, which means they can jack up your prices.
But the rise of monopolies over the past few decades is not a perversion or corruption of market dynamics. This is to be expected in a competitive system. Because remember, the end goal of competition is to end the competition. And the easiest way to do this is by absorbing your rivals. Yet another structural flaw of our system that cannot be avoided until we arrive at a new model that prioritizes habitat preservation and human health over the silly and immature notion of personal gain. Now, let us continue on to the most important part of this video, the part where we discuss how money is actually created and dispersed throughout the economy. For this section, I'm going to refer to the books The New Human Rights Movement by Peter Joseph, as well as Web of Debt by Ellen Brown. These are two invaluable resources for helping us understand why life is the way it is for the vast majority of people on this planet. And it all has to do with the inner functionings of our economy. What we have to understand is that all money today is created out of debt. In the past, it may have been backed by precious metals such as gold and silver, but the original association of money has always been centered around the idea of credit and debt. Since things were far more scarce back in the day, all resources that were lent had to be eventually paid back in the form of raw materials or labor, which was the basis of trade. The invention of money made it easier to lend, and money was originally intended as a certificate of debt to hold accountability for the borrowing parties. But it's important to note that debt actually appeared before the existence of money. David Graeber's book, Debt: The First 5,000 Years, explains this very well. The relationship between debt and money is even more apparent today, as money is brought into existence by a process of inventing debt at the same time. All money is created out of debt by banks, extending credit and giving loans. Banks loan the money to the government with interest attached to it. Since we have lived in a society centered around the idea of profit and personal gain, and since banking itself needs profits like everything else in our society, each loan is given with interest attached to that loan. But if all money is created from loans, and loans have an additional interest attached to them, and if returning those loans removes the money from the money supply, where does the money come from to pay back all the loans as well as their interest? It doesn't exist. The amount owed back plus interest is always going to be more than the existing money supply. And the only way to pay everything back is to create more money, which also creates more debt and interest on top of it. In fact, money and debt are so closely tied together, as weird as it sounds, if all debts were paid off, there would be no money in circulation whatsoever. But wait a second. If interest is charged and more money needs to be returned than actually exists, and only banks create those interest-bearing loans, the actual value owed back to the banks will always be more than how much money will ever exist. This process of money creation is therefore naturally inflationary, since money has to keep being printed, which results in a decrease of the value of existing money. I hope that makes perfect sense. The free market is naturally inflationary. This is inherent to its makeup and function. And the proof of this money to debt ratio is easy to see. As of 2015, there have been $200 trillion of debt in the global economy, which is comically 286% of the GDP. The only outcome of this process is either bankruptcy and defaults, property repossession, or loans to simply extend the day of reckoning when things have to be paid back. It's basically a game of monetary musical chairs. When the music stops, someone is left out to dry. There is a constant pressure cooker of impending debt that will always be higher than the amount of money in circulation. And yeah, you can say that those who are not responsible or work hard enough deserve to be punished for not paying it back. But oftentimes, the failure to repay is not the issue of personal irresponsibility or incorrect choice. It is a mathematical inevitability that has to happen, a result due to the amount of unpayable debt in the system. And at the end of the day, Who owns the banks? The wealthy, obviously, not the poor. The financial sector, including lending institutions, are the realm of the wealthy 1%, as they play a game that has real life consequences for the average population. So the entire world is producing debt by interest charges that are mathematically impossible to pay, and as we all know, there are severe consequences for not paying it back. This process of money lending has poverty built into its very design, since there is a guarantee that even if everyone plays their hands right, there are those who get the short end of the stick. And you know, I'm not a communist. I don't have to be a communist to call this class warfare, and to see that there is a strong and continuous correlation between the rich getting richer and the poor going deeper and deeper into debt. So getting back to inflation, the prices of goods and services will always be slowly rising and purchasing power slowly falling, as average incomes generally do not rise at the same rate. In reality, inflation is actually a hidden tax against the population, as it strongly affects those with fixed incomes. And historically, we've seen what happens when debt burdens and devaluations take dramatic turns in a given country. The more debt generally, the more inflation. The hyperinflationary period in Germany after the First World War is a perfect example. Germany had massive deficits and decided to just print money continuously, so much that by 1923, it took 200 billion marks just to buy a loaf of bread. In poor countries, inflation can cause crippling levels of inequality and social disadvantages. And let's be honest, these poor nations are generally exploited by the rich and powerful, left to carry tremendous debt due to the way our predatory financial system works. Good current examples of this are Venezuela and Iran. Iran is a country with vast resources and great technological accomplishments. Yet, due to sanctions and economic warfare imposed by the United States, the majority are suffering tremendous economic hardships due to inflation. Back in 2010, $1 bought 1,000 toman. Now, $1 is a staggering 32,000 toman, making the affordability of basic life needs and medicine almost impossible, especially during the COVID crisis. And to think that nations with a wealth of resources are economically deprived and poor is just ridiculous. In the US, $100 of 1950 was equivalent to $1,000 today in its purchasing power, an almost 900% increase in 65 years. Even though monetary expansion takes place at a steady rate in most economies, this cannot go on forever, since after enough time, the debt and inflation become much higher than the amount of money in existence. Therefore, contraction has to occur at some point to reset the cycle, giving us what we all know as the economic crash or bust. The boom and bust cycle is yet another process of class war. Economic crashes are highly destructive to those holding the most debt in society, and in times of recession, many assets and small businesses diminish, making them more affordable to the wealthy. Business consolidation is very common during these times as small businesses get wiped out, absorbed by larger ones for pennies on the dollar. Referring back to the 2007 financial crisis, the post-debt bubble default caused a complex chain reaction that affected the entire world, with almost 9 million people having lost their homes to foreclosure in the US alone. And you know, how in the world can we call this an economic system if it does this to people? How is it economizing anything when there are more empty homes than there are homeless people? As I stated in an old video, capitalism is not an economic system. I mentioned the term posse weed. The purpose of a system is what it does, not what it is meant to do. And if we are to look at historical evidence, we can see that the market capitalist system keeps the majority of people deprived and barely surviving as it siphons money and resources from the poor to the richest members of society. And let's make this very clear. As cliche as this may sound, this is not a communist perspective. We are looking at this through the lens of systems analysis, using social science and systems understanding to see how the structural goals of growth, profit, and competition inevitably lead to these outcomes. Very often in public talks, the idea of simply removing debt and interest from the economy is brought up. But these features are fundamental to the structure of our economic system. Debt has been around for thousands of years and forms the root of capitalist exchange, since exchange is about mutual values being traded. In the case where a need is required, debt is created, and it does not matter if the debt is not attached to money. In a scarcity and competitive-oriented worldview, debt is going to exist either way. However, the most powerful realization is that these game rules are not immutable. We are not short on resources, and our only limiting factor seems to be money, due to the inefficiencies of the market system. Which brings us to the idea of a resource-based economy, removing the idea of debt altogether and giving people what they need without a price tag. In a resource-based economy, we utilize our technology and productive capacity to provide a high standard of living for all people, and no more silly, fictional games to be played. Money is a method of managing scarcity. In a society that deliberately pursues abundance and efficiency, there would be no need for money whatsoever. Yet, here we are, at the crossroads to the future. It's really amazing to me how across all cultures around the world, for thousands of years, humanity has had this bizarre and perverse belief in the idea of creating debt out of thin air. Even in the current age of incredible problem-solving technology, we fail to consider that our physical capacity to create an abundance can eliminate the need for debt, since it only exists in a situation of real scarcity. Back in the day, our greatest limiting factor was nature, since we were not technologically advanced. Nowadays, the greatest limiting factor is our economic system. The market is what is holding us back. It is a psychological and social distortion, and easily the greatest delusion in the history of human thought. One thing I do know is that people need to be informed and inspired to think about new possibilities for society. And lastly, don't expect any real solution from Bitcoin. That's going to be another massive debt bubble that is bound to burst eventually, just like the student debt and the housing crisis. And for more on this and why Bitcoin cannot be a long-term solution, I highly suggest you check out the video by Peter Joseph from his podcast Revolution Now, where he explains the flaws with Bitcoin in perfect detail. That episode is linked below in the video description. Peace out. If we analyze our socioeconomic system under the structuralist lens, we see that market capitalism structurally requires scarcity, inefficiency, and the perpetuation of inequality, and that it would cease to exist in a world of abundance and efficiency. Bottom line is, we cannot ever expect to save our natural habitats or for people to behave in an ethical or rational manner if the system they live under demands the opposite of that behavior on a routine basis. To fix our broken world, we need to apply solutions from a systems perspective, meaning structural change of the economy and culture itself, not the mere patchwork of laws and legislation which avoid the central issue at hand. Systemic change from the ground up or nothing. We're here to establish an entirely new table and demand what is rightfully the heritage of all mankind.